I discovered the most devastating betrayal of my life while scrolling through Instagram during my lunch break at Target. There it was, plastered across my sister Madison's story, a gleaming white BMW with a giant red bow, my parents beaming beside her at the dealership. $35,900, the price tag clearly visible. Just 3 weeks earlier, these same parents had looked me in the eye and claimed they couldn't afford my $12,000 gallbladder surgery because medical expenses were too risky financially. The physical pain I'd been enduring for months suddenly felt insignificant compared to this emotional knife twisting in my chest. The agony had started 6 months ago when I was 24 working full-time at Target while taking night classes at Dallas Community College to become a registered nurse. Sharp stabbing pains would hit my right side without warning, doubling me over between helping customers find the right size jeans or restocking shelves in electronics. I'd rush to the employee bathroom, gripping the sink until the wave passed, then return to work with a forced smile. My first emergency room visit happened on a Tuesday night after my shift. The pain had been so intense I could barely drive myself to Presbyterian Hospital. After hours of tests and a CT scan, Dr. Martinez, a kind woman in her 50s with gentle hands and tired eyes, delivered the diagnosis that would change everything: acute cholecystitis. My gallbladder was inflamed and filled with stones requiring surgical removal. "This isn't something that will resolve on its own, Rebecca," Dr. Martinez explained, using my full name the way my grandmother Dorothy used to. "The attacks will continue getting worse until we remove it. I'm recommending laparoscopic cholecystectomy within the next few weeks." The estimate came to $11,800 after insurance. My part-time retail job provided basic coverage, but the deductible and co-pays would still leave me responsible for the majority. I'd been saving every penny for nursing school, already working 50-hour weeks between Target and weekend shifts at a local diner. The money simply wasn't there. That's when I made the decision to approach my parents. Robert and Janet lived in a comfortable 3-bedroom ranch house in suburban Plano, about 20 minutes from my apartment. Dad had worked as a sales manager at Prestige Motors for over 15 years, while Mom built a successful career selling residential real estate. They'd always been financially stable, taking annual vacations to Colorado and recently renovating their kitchen with granite countertops and stainless steel appliances. I chose a Sunday afternoon when I knew they'd be home bringing homemade chocolate chip cookies as a peace offering. The conversation started well enough with Mom admiring my weight loss, not knowing it was from being unable to eat without triggering attacks. Dad asked about school, and I proudly shared that I'd maintained a 3.7 GPA while working full-time. Then I explained about the surgery. I showed them Dr. Martinez's treatment plan, the cost breakdown, even payment options I'd researched. I wasn't asking for charity. I offered to formalize it as a loan with interest to pay them back over time once I finished nursing school and started earning a proper salary. The response crushed me. Mom set down her coffee mug and exchanged a meaningful look with Dad before launching into a lecture about fiscal responsibility. They explained how their finances were stretched thin with their mortgage, car payments, and Madison's college expenses. Dad mentioned that his dealership had been struggling with sales down and his commission suffering accordingly. "Medical bills are so unpredictable, sweetheart," Mom said in that patronizing tone she'd perfected over the years. "What if complications arise? What if you need additional procedures? We simply can't take on that kind of open-ended financial risk right now." They suggested I explore payment plans with the hospital, apply for medical credit cards, or wait until I qualified for better insurance through a full-time position. Dad even mentioned that some companies offered signing bonuses for nurses, implying I should just suffer through the pain until after graduation. I left their house that day feeling smaller than I had in years. The drive back to my 1-bedroom apartment was a blur of disappointment and physical discomfort. Another attack hit that night, leaving me writhing on my bathroom floor at 2 a.m., wondering how much more my body could endure. The next few weeks passed in a haze of pain, medication heating pads, and careful meal planning to avoid triggering foods. I researched every financial option my parents had suggested, only to discover that medical credit cards carried interest rates over 20%, and payment plans would still require substantial down payments I couldn't afford. The attacks continued, sometimes striking during work hours and forcing me to disappear into storage areas until they passed. 3 weeks after my parents' devastating rejection, I was clearing dinner plates from our family's weekly Sunday gathering when Madison burst through the front door like a tornado of excitement. Her shoulder-length blonde hair bounced as she practically skipped into the dining room, waving an official-looking envelope above her head. I got into UT Austin's marketing program. She announced, her voice reaching a pitch that made our family's golden retriever Cooper tilt his head in confusion. The reaction was immediate and electric. Mom dropped her fork onto her plate with a clatter, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Dad pushed back from the table so quickly his chair nearly toppled, rushing around to sweep Madison into a bear hug that lifted her feet off the ground. "Honey, that's incredible. When did you find out?" Mom asked, already reaching for the acceptance letter to read every word twice. Madison had been working toward this moment for 2 years, taking marketing classes at Collin College while working part-time at our cousin Stephanie's boutique in downtown McKinney. At 22, she'd always been the golden child, the one whose achievements earned prominent display on the refrigerator while mine were acknowledged with brief nods and suggestions for improvement. "The letter came yesterday, but I wanted to tell you both together." Madison gushed, her green eyes sparkling with the kind of joy I hadn't felt in months. "Professor Williams said my portfolio was one of the strongest he'd reviewed this year. I start in the fall semester." Dad returned to his seat, but couldn't stop grinning. He reached across the table to squeeze Madison's hand, his face radiating the kind of pride I'd always craved but rarely received. "We're so incredibly proud of you, sweetheart. This calls for a celebration." Mom nodded enthusiastically, already mentally planning what I suspected would be an elaborate acknowledgement of Madison's achievement. "Absolutely. This is huge, Madison. UT Austin's marketing program is extremely competitive." That's when Dad and Mom exchanged one of their secret looks, the kind that had always made me feel like an outsider looking in on their private world. It was the same expression they'd shared when planning surprise parties or Christmas gifts loaded with meaning I wasn't privy to. "Actually," Dad said slowly, his voice taking on a mysterious tone that immediately captured Madison's attention, "your mother and I have been discussing something special for when you graduated from Collin College." Madison's eyes widened, and she leaned forward in her chair like a child being told about Christmas morning. "What kind of something special?" Mom joined the mysterious act, her smile growing broader as she played along with whatever secret they'd been harboring. "Well, we know how hard you've been working balancing school and your job at Stephanie's boutique. You've maintained excellent grades while building real-world experience in retail marketing." And Dad continued, clearly enjoying the suspense he was creating. "We wanted to make sure you have everything you need to succeed at UT Austin. Networking is such an important part of business school, and first impressions matter in the marketing world." Madison practically vibrated with anticipation, her hands clasped together as if she were praying. "Are you talking about a new laptop? Professional clothes for presentations? Oh my gosh, are we going shopping for interview outfits?" Her guesses grew more elaborate and excited with each suggestion. Maybe they were planning a summer internship at one of Dad's business connections. Perhaps they'd arranged for her to shadow Mom during real estate showings to learn client relations. Could they be funding a study abroad program or marketing conference? Dad chuckled, clearly delighted by Madison's growing excitement. "Let's just say that when you see what we have planned, you'll understand how serious we are about investing in your future success." Mom reached over to pat Madison's arm affectionately. "We've been saving for this surprise for quite some time now. It's something that will make a real difference in your college experience and beyond." I forced myself to smile and offer congratulations, even as my abdomen throbbed with another impending attack. The irony wasn't lost on me that my parents had apparently been setting aside money for Madison's future success, while claiming they couldn't afford to address my immediate medical crisis. Their sudden financial optimism stood in stark contrast to their recent claims about stretched budgets and unpredictable medical expenses. "When do I get to find out what this mysterious surprise is?" Madison asked, bouncing slightly in her chair. Soon," Mom promised with a wink. "Very soon. We just need to finalize a few details first." The conversation continued around me as they discussed Madison's upcoming transition to a major university, her plans for campus life, and her career aspirations in marketing. I participated when directly addressed, offering appropriate responses while privately calculating how many extra shifts I'd need to pick up to make even a dent in my medical bills. As the evening wound down and we cleared the remaining dishes, I couldn't shake the feeling that my parents' mysterious financial planning revealed everything I needed to know about my place in this family's priorities. The discovery happened during my 30-minute lunch break on a Wednesday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after that dinner conversation about Madison's mysterious surprise. I'd grabbed a turkey sandwich from the Target Starbucks and was sitting in my car in the employee parking lot trying to find a comfortable position that wouldn't aggravate my tender abdomen. Mindlessly scrolling through Instagram while eating, I tapped through stories from coworkers, college friends, and family members. Most were typical Wednesday content workout selfies, coffee photos, complaints about midweek fatigue. Then, Madison's profile icon appeared at the top of my screen, and I tapped it without thinking. The first image stopped my heart. A pristine white BMW X3 sat gleaming in afternoon sunlight, adorned with an enormous red satin bow that looked like something from a luxury car commercial. The setting was unmistakably familiar because it was the Prestige Motors lot where Dad had worked for 15 years. I nearly choked on my sandwich as I tapped to the next slide. There was Madison arms spread wide beside the vehicle, her face radiant with pure joy. The caption read, "Dreams really do come true. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for believing in me." But it was the third slide that sent my world spinning completely off its axis. A close-up shot of the window sticker, clearly showing the manufacturer's suggested retail price, $35,900. Below that, Madison had added text that made my stomach drop. "Best graduation gift ever. My parents are absolutely incredible." The fourth and final slide featured our parents flanking Madison beside the BMW, all three wearing expressions of pure happiness. Dad had his arm around Madison's shoulders, while Mom held up keys that caught the sunlight. They looked like the perfect, successful family celebrating their daughter's achievements with generous financial support. My hands began trembling as the reality crashed over me. These were the same parents who had looked me directly in the eyes just weeks ago and claimed they couldn't afford my $12,000 surgery. The same people who had lectured me about fiscal responsibility and unpredictable medical expenses while suggesting I explore high-interest credit cards or simply endure the pain until I could find better insurance. They had purchased my sister a luxury vehicle that cost 3 times more than my surgery, while telling me their finances were stretched thin. "Becca, you okay?" My coworker Ashley appeared beside my car window, concern creasing her features. Ashley worked in cosmetics and had become a friend over the past year, often covering for me when attacks forced me to step away from the floor. I realized I was hyperventilating, my vision starting to tunnel around the edges. Ashley opened my passenger door and slid in without invitation, immediately reaching over to rub my back as I struggled to breathe normally. "What happened? Are you having another attack?" she asked, her voice gentle but urgent. I couldn't form words, so I handed her my phone with Madison's Instagram story still displayed. Ashley's eyes widened as she scrolled through the images, her expression shifting from confusion to outrage. Wait, isn't this your sister? And these are your parents who said they couldn't help with your surgery. I managed a nod, finally able to draw a full breath. The physical pain in my side had nothing on the emotional devastation coursing through my system. Every interaction with my parents over the past month suddenly took on new meaning. Their claims of financial struggle, their suggestions that I handle my medical crisis alone, their lectures about fiscal responsibility, all while secretly planning to spend nearly $36,000 on Madison's graduation gift. Becca, this is completely messed up, Ashley said softly. How can they justify buying your sister a BMW while you're suffering with gallbladder attacks? I finally found my voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. I don't know. I honestly don't know. The worst part wasn't even the money, though the amount was staggering. It was the deliberate deception, the way they'd looked me in the eye and fabricated financial hardship while secretly saving for Madison's extravagant gift. They had chosen to let me suffer in physical pain rather than provide the medical care I needed, all while planning to surprise my sister with a luxury vehicle that would enhance her college experience. Ashley stayed with me for the remainder of our break, helping me process the betrayal while ensuring I was stable enough to return to work. But as we walked back through Target's automatic doors, I knew this discovery had fundamentally changed my relationship with my family forever. The pain in my side pulsed with each step, a constant reminder that while my sister was posting celebratory selfies with her new BMW, I was still facing the same medical crisis my parents had deemed too expensive to address. That evening, I drove to my parents' house with Madison's Instagram story screenshots saved on my phone and a determination I'd never felt before. The white BMW sat prominently in their driveway like a monument to their hypocrisy, its chrome details catching the porch light. I could see warm yellow light spilling from the living room windows where my family was probably admiring Madison's new acquisition. I didn't knock. I still had my key from when I lived here during community college, and this conversation was too important for polite formalities. The front door opened into their familiar entryway, where Madison's high school graduation photo still hung beside various family portraits that chronicled our childhood. "Becca, what a nice surprise," Mom called from the living room, her voice carrying that forced cheerfulness she reserved for unexpected visits. "Come see Madison's graduation gift. Isn't it absolutely gorgeous?" I found them arranged on the sectional sofa like a Norman Rockwell painting of family contentment. Dad occupied his usual corner spot with a beer, while Mom curled beside him with a glass of white wine. Madison sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by BMW brochures and paperwork, clearly still basking in the afterglow of her surprise. "Madison's been telling us about all the features," Dad said proudly. "The safety ratings are exceptional, and the fuel efficiency will save her money during college. It's really more of an investment than an expense." I pulled out my phone and held up the Instagram screenshots, my voice steady despite the emotions churning beneath the surface. "So, this is where your money went. $35,900 for Madison's graduation gift." The room's atmosphere shifted instantly. Dad set down his beer with deliberate care, while Mom's smile faltered around the edges. Madison looked between us with growing confusion, sensing the tension but not understanding its source. "Becca, honey, we can explain," Mom began, but I cut her off with a raised hand. 3 weeks ago, you told me you couldn't afford my surgery because medical expenses were too risky and your finances were stretched thin. You suggested I get credit cards or wait for better insurance rather than help me with $12,000. But somehow you managed to save almost $36,000 for Madison's car. Dad leaned forward, his expression taking on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. "Sweetheart, those are completely different situations. Madison's gift is an investment in her future career success. She'll be networking at UT Austin, meeting potential employers and clients. First impressions matter in the marketing world. And my surgery isn't an investment in my future. I shot back, feeling heat rise in my cheeks. I can't even work full shifts anymore because of the pain. I'm missing classes when attacks hit during evening lectures. How is my health less important than Madison's image? Mom jumped into the conversation with her real estate agent voice smooth and practiced. Becca, you're being dramatic. Your surgery is optional. It's not like you have cancer or a heart condition. People live with gallbladder issues for years. The casualness with which she dismissed my daily agony left me momentarily speechless. Madison was watching this exchange with growing alarm, finally beginning to understand that her celebration was built on my suffering. Optional. I repeated, my voice rising, despite my efforts to stay calm. I collapsed at work last Tuesday. I spend nights on the bathroom floor because the pain is so intense, I can't lie down. Dr. Martinez said the attacks will keep getting worse until the gallbladder ruptures, which could kill me. Dad waved his hand dismissively as if swatting away inconvenient facts. Doctors always present worst-case scenarios to cover themselves legally. You're young and healthy. Your body will adapt. But Madison needs a BMW to succeed in college, I asked, incredulous. Madison chose a practical major with excellent earning potential. Mom explained, her tone suggesting I should understand this obvious logic. Marketing graduates from UT Austin start with salaries that justify this investment. Nursing, while admirable, has limited upward mobility. The conversation was spiraling into territory that revealed years of accumulated resentment and favoritism I'd tried to ignore. Madison was the golden child who deserved investment and support, while I was expected to handle my problems independently, regardless of the cost to my health or future. So my life is worth less than Madison's networking opportunities, I asked bluntly. Dad stood up abruptly, his patience clearly exhausted. Becca, you're being selfish and jealous instead of being happy for your sister. Life isn't fair and some people have to work harder than others. Madison has shown initiative and ambition that deserves recognition. And what have I shown? I demanded. I work 50 hours a week while maintaining a 3.7 GPA in nursing school. I've never asked you for anything before this surgery. That's exactly the problem, Mom interjected. You've always been independent to a fault. Madison knows how to accept help gracefully and show appreciation. She understands family dynamics better than you do. The conversation ended when Dad told me to grow up and handle my own problems like an adult, while Mom suggested I was manufacturing drama because I couldn't stand seeing Madison succeed. I left their house that night understanding that my parents had made their choice. Madison's happiness and success mattered more than my health and survival. The BMW in their driveway would serve as a daily reminder of where I ranked in their priorities, and it was dead last. Madison returned home around 11 that night from her celebration dinner with college friends, and I was still sitting in my car across the street trying to process what had just happened. I watched her pull the gleaming BMW into the driveway beside Dad's pickup truck, the luxury vehicle looking almost obscene next to their modest family cars. She noticed my Honda Civic immediately and bounced over with the kind of energy that only comes from having your wildest dreams exceeded. Her face glowed with happiness as she tapped on my passenger window, gesturing for me to roll it down. Becca, I'm so glad you're still here. Did Mom and Dad show you all the features? The sound system is absolutely incredible, and the leather seats have heating and cooling options. Come look at the navigation system. I reluctantly got out of my car, my abdomen cramping from sitting in one position too long. Madison practically dragged me toward the BMW, chattering excitedly about every detail from the panoramic sunroof to the automatic parking assist. Feel this leather, she insisted, opening the driver's door and running her hand across the seat. It's like butter, and look at all these controls. The salesperson spent 2 hours just explaining the technology package. I stood there watching my sister caress her $36,000 graduation gift while my gallbladder continued its slow rebellion against my body. The contrast felt surreal, like we were living in parallel universes where the same parents could simultaneously claim poverty and display extraordinary generosity. Madison, we need to talk, I said quietly. She spun around, finally noticing my serious expression. What's wrong? You look upset. Aren't you happy for me? I thought you'd be excited about the car. I just had a conversation with Mom and Dad about my surgery. Madison's enthusiasm dimmed slightly, but she maintained her celebratory mood. Oh, the gallbladder thing, I'm sure they'll figure something out. They always do when it's really important. The casual dismissal of my medical crisis as the gallbladder thing hit me like a physical blow. This was my sister, someone who supposedly loved me, reducing months of agony to a minor inconvenience that ranked somewhere below her car's entertainment system. Madison, they refused to help me pay for surgery that cost $12,000. They said they couldn't afford medical expenses because their finances were stretched thin. She blinked at me with genuine confusion as if I were speaking a foreign language. But that's totally different, Becca. My car is an investment in my future career. It'll help with networking at UT Austin, making connections with professors and other marketing students. Image matters in business. The echo of our parents' exact justification coming from Madison's mouth made my stomach turn. And my health doesn't matter. Of course it does. But your surgery isn't really an emergency, right? I mean, you've been dealing with this for months. If it were truly serious, wouldn't you have had it by now? I stared at my sister, searching her face for any sign of empathy or understanding. Instead, I found the same dismissive attitude our parents had displayed, wrapped in Madison's characteristic optimism that made it somehow more devastating. Madison, I collapse from pain. I can't eat normal meals. I work in retail while attending nursing school, and I can barely afford rent, let alone medical bills. Meanwhile, you get a BMW for graduating with a marketing degree. She shifted uncomfortably, finally sensing the depth of my frustration. But instead of offering sympathy or support, Madison doubled down on defending her good fortune. Look, I'm sorry you're having health problems, but that's not my fault. I worked really hard for this degree, maintaining my GPA while working at Stephanie's boutique. I've been responsible and focused on my goals. Are you saying I haven't been responsible, though? I'm saying maybe if you'd chosen a better major or worked harder to stand out academically, Mom and Dad might invest in your future too. Nursing is fine, but it's not exactly prestigious. Marketing opens doors to corporate leadership, advertising agencies, maybe even my own business someday. The cruelty of her words took my breath away. Madison genuinely believed she deserved luxury while I deserved suffering, because her chosen career path impressed our parents more than mine. In her mind, my dedication to helping sick people was somehow less valuable than her ambition to sell products to consumers. Madison, I'm not asking for a car. I'm asking to not die from a ruptured gallbladder. She laughed, actually laughed as if I were being melodramatic. Die, come on, Becca. You're being way too dramatic. People live with gallbladder problems all the time. My roommate's mom had hers removed like 5 years after diagnosis, and she's fine. 5 years of pain that I'm supposed to just endure. Life isn't always comfortable, Madison said with the wisdom of someone who'd never experienced real hardship. Sometimes we have to make sacrifices for long-term success. Maybe this is teaching you resilience. I realized in that moment that my sister was lost to me. The Madison I'd grown up with, who used to share secrets and defend me against childhood bullies, had been replaced by someone who measured human worth in terms of career potential and social status. Our parents had raised her to believe she deserved the best, while others deserved whatever scraps remained. Madison, your car costs 3 times what my surgery would cost. How do you justify that? Because my car will last for years and help me build a successful career. Your surgery is just fixing a problem. It's not creating opportunities or opening doors. It's maintenance, not investment. She actually used the word maintenance to describe potentially life-saving medical treatment. My sister had reduced my health crisis to automotive terminology, as if my gallbladder were no different from changing oil or replacing worn tires. The conversation ended when Madison suggested that maybe I should focus on gratitude instead of jealousy, and reminded me that success requires different strategies for different people. I drove home that night understanding that the financial betrayal was only part of the problem. My entire family had convinced themselves that my suffering was acceptable because it didn't interfere with Madison's success story. 2 days later, while Madison was out showing her BMW to friends at the local Starbucks, my worst gallbladder attack yet struck during the Friday evening rush at Target. I'd been restocking clearance items in the home goods section when the pain hit like a lightning bolt, dropping me to my knees beside a display of discounted throw pillows. The agony was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Previous attacks had been sharp and localized, but this felt like molten metal, spreading through my entire torso. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except grip the metal shelving and pray for the wave to pass. Somebody help Becca's down? Ashley's voice seemed to come from very far away, though she was kneeling beside me within seconds. Other voices joined hers as customers and coworkers gathered around my crumpled form. The paramedics arrived in what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. They found me curled in a fetal position, my face gray with pain and my clothing soaked with perspiration. One of them, a woman with kind eyes and steady hands, knelt beside me while her partner prepared a gurney. "Can you tell me your pain level on a scale of 1 to 10, she asked gently. 15. I gasped, unable to form longer sentences. The ride to Methodist Hospital blurred together in a symphony of sirens, medical equipment beeping, and IV needles finding veins in my arm. The paramedics radioed ahead with terms I didn't understand, but recognized as serious from their tone and urgency. Dr. Martinez met us in the emergency bay, her expression grave as she reviewed the paramedics' report. Within minutes, I was surrounded by nurses drawing blood, hooking up monitors, and asking questions I could barely answer through the waves of pain. "Rebecca, we need to run some tests immediately," Dr. Martinez explained as she examined my abdomen. "Your gallbladder appears to be infected, and we're seeing signs of inflammation that suggest potential complications." The CT scan revealed what she'd feared. My gallbladder wasn't just inflamed anymore, it was actively infected and showing signs of beginning to perforate. Dr. Martinez pulled up the images on a computer screen, pointing to areas that looked wrong even to my untrained eyes. "This has progressed beyond what we saw in your previous scans," she said seriously. "The infection could spread into your abdominal cavity if the gallbladder ruptures, which would be life-threatening. We need to operate tonight, not next week or next month." "Tonight," I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "Within the next few hours, ideally. Every minute we wait increases the risk of perforation and sepsis. This is no longer elective surgery, Rebecca. This is an emergency." I lay on the hospital bed, staring at the fluorescent lights overhead, while Dr. Martinez explained the immediate procedure requirements. Emergency surgery meant emergency costs probably double what the original estimate had been. My parents' voices echoed in my memory, dismissing this exact scenario as unlikely and financially irresponsible to plan for. "I need to call my parents," I said weakly. Dr. Martinez nodded and stepped away to give me privacy. My hands shook as I dialed Mom's cell phone, dreading the conversation, but knowing I had no other options. Becca, it's almost 10 o'clock. Is everything okay?" Mom's voice carried mild irritation rather than concern. "Mom, I'm at Methodist Hospital. My gallbladder is infected and they need to operate tonight. Dr. Martinez says it could rupture and kill me if they don't remove it immediately." Silence stretched across the phone line for several heartbeats before Mom responded with an audible sigh. "Oh, Becca, why does this have to happen right now? We just made a major financial commitment with Madison's car." "Mom, I might die." "You're not going to die," Doctors always present worst-case scenarios to protect themselves from lawsuits. Can't they give you antibiotics to clear up the infection first? Dr. Martinez says there isn't time. The gallbladder could perforate. Another pause. Then Mom's voice took on the tone she used when dealing with difficult real estate clients. All right, let us think about this. We'll need to research our options, maybe call our financial advisor about emergency loan possibilities. Can you ask the hospital about charity care programs? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My mother was discussing research and financial consultations while I lay on a hospital bed facing emergency surgery for a condition that could kill me within hours. Mom, they want to operate tonight. Tonight seems awfully rushed. Get a second opinion. Maybe transfer to a different hospital that offers better payment plans. We'll call you back after we've had a chance to discuss our options. She hung up before I could respond, leaving me alone with the steady beep of monitors and the knowledge that my parents were treating my medical emergency as a financial inconvenience that required careful consideration rather than immediate action. Dr. Martinez returned 20 minutes later to find me crying quietly, still clutching my phone and waiting for my parents to call back with their decision about whether my life was worth their financial investment. I must have dozed off despite the pain, because I woke to find someone sitting beside my hospital bed who definitely hadn't been there before. For a moment, I thought I was hallucinating from the medication they'd given me for pain management. "Grandpa, William," I whispered, blinking to make sure the familiar figure wasn't a fever dream. My grandfather looked exactly as I remembered from our last visit nearly 8 months ago, though his silver hair seemed whiter and the lines around his eyes had deepened. At 78, he still carried himself with the quiet dignity of someone who'd spent 40 years teaching high school mathematics before retirement. "Hello, sweetheart," he said softly, reaching over to pat my hand with fingers that felt strong despite their age. "I got your message." "My message I didn't call you." William's expression darkened in a way I'd never seen before, transforming his usually gentle features into something almost frightening. "No, but someone else did. Ashley from Target looked up my number and called me after the ambulance took you away. She was worried because your parents weren't answering their phones." I felt a surge of gratitude toward my coworker, followed immediately by embarrassment that a virtual stranger had shown more concern for my welfare than my own family. "Grandpa, you didn't need to drive all the way here. It's almost midnight." "Rebecca Ann, don't you dare apologize for needing help," he said firmly, using my full name the way he had when I was little and had scraped my knee or lost a tooth. "Now tell me exactly what's happening with your surgery and why you're lying here in pain instead of being prepped for the operating room." I explained everything: the months of attacks, my parents' refusal to help with the original surgery, the BMW purchase tonight's emergency, and their request that I research payment plans while my gallbladder threatened to rupture. William listened without interruption, his face growing darker with each detail. $36,000 for Madison's car, he repeated slowly when I finished, and they claim they can't afford $12,000 for your surgery. They said medical expenses are too risky because of potential complications. William pulled out his cell phone, an older model that looked tiny in his large hands. "I'm going to make a phone call, Rebecca. There are some things about this family that you don't know, things that should have been explained to you years ago." "What kind of things?" "The kind that involve promises that were broken and money that was supposed to be protected." He stood up from the chair with the careful movements of someone whose joints reminded him daily of his age. "Your grandmother Dorothy was very specific about certain arrangements, and it appears those arrangements have been ignored." He walked toward the window overlooking the hospital parking lot, dialing a number he seemed to know by heart. I could hear his side of the conversation, though he spoke in the hushed tones people use for serious business calls. "James, it's William Chen. I'm sorry to call so late, but we have an emergency situation involving Dorothy's trust. Yes, the medical emergency provisions. Tonight, Methodist Hospital. They've been using the funds for other purposes." My grandfather's voice grew harder as the conversation continued, mentioning terms like fiduciary responsibility and breach of trust obligations that I didn't understand but sounded ominous. He paced slowly beside my bed, his free hand gesturing as if the person on the other end could see him. How quickly can you review the account activity? Monday isn't soon enough, James. My granddaughter could die tonight while her parents debate payment plans. I understand, but this is exactly the kind of emergency Dorothy anticipated. He hung up and turned back to me with an expression I couldn't read. Rebecca, I need you to not worry about anything. Your surgery is going to be taken care of, and some people are about to learn what family loyalty actually means. Grandpa, I don't understand what's happening. William sat back down and took my hand in both of his. Your grandmother Dorothy loved you very much. When she died, she made certain arrangements to protect you and Madison from exactly this kind of situation. Unfortunately, those arrangements required trusting people who turned out to be untrustworthy. Before I could ask more questions, Dr. Martinez appeared in the doorway with a concerned expression. Rebecca, we really need to proceed with the surgery. Your latest blood work shows increasing signs of infection. William stood up immediately. Doctor, proceed with whatever treatment my granddaughter needs. All financial arrangements will be handled by Monday morning at the latest. Sir, I appreciate your concern, but hospital policy requires... Doctor. William interrupted gently but firmly. I've been making financial arrangements since before you were born. My granddaughter will receive the care she needs tonight, and all bills will be paid in full. You have my personal guarantee. Something in William's tone convinced Dr. Martinez that this wasn't an empty promise from a worried relative. She nodded and turned back to me. Rebecca, we'll prep you for surgery immediately. Your grandfather can wait in the surgical family area. As the nurses began preparing me for the operating room, William leaned down to kiss my forehead. Everything is going to be different after tonight, sweetheart. Your grandmother made sure of that. I woke up in recovery 6 hours later, feeling like I'd been run over by a truck, but for the first time in months, the constant sharp pain in my right side was gone. The incision sites were tender and my throat was raw from intubation, but the relief of not having that familiar gallbladder ache was almost overwhelming. William was dozing in a chair beside my bed, still wearing yesterday's clothes, but somehow managing to look dignified even while sleeping in a hospital chair. A stack of papers sat on the bedside table next to a coffee cup that had clearly been refilled multiple times during the night. Grandpa, I whispered. His eyes opened immediately, and he smiled with the kind of relief that told me he'd been genuinely worried despite his confident demeanor before surgery. There's my girl. How are you feeling? Sore, but better. Different. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted the movement as my abdominal muscles protested. Did you stay here all night? Where else would I be? He asked, as if leaving hadn't even been an option. Dr. Martinez said the surgery went perfectly. Your gallbladder was definitely infected and beginning to perforate, but they removed it before any serious complications developed. I noticed the papers on the bedside table had official letterheads from law firms and banks. Grandpa, what are all those documents? William's expression shifted to something I could only describe as satisfied determination. Those, sweetheart, are copies of your grandmother Dorothy's trust documentation and account statements that my attorney James delivered at 6 this morning. Trust documentation. When your grandmother died 5 years ago, she left a substantial inheritance specifically designated for her grandchildren's medical emergencies and educational expenses. The total amount in the trust was $68,000, divided equally between you and Madison. My mind struggled to process this information through the post-surgery fog. I don't understand. Mom and Dad never mentioned any inheritance. William's jaw tightened visibly. That's because they were supposed to inform both of you about the trust when you turned 18, and they were required to provide annual statements showing how the money was being managed. Instead, they've been treating it as their personal savings account. He handed me one of the documents pointing to highlighted sections that showed account activity over the past 5 years. Even with my medication-addled brain, the pattern was clear, regular withdrawals for everything from vacation expenses to home improvements to luxury purchases. Grandpa, this shows they took money out last month for $36,000. Madison's BMW, William confirmed grimly, purchased entirely with your inheritance money, not theirs. They've been lying to you about their financial situation while spending your grandmother's gifts as if they were entitled to every penny. The betrayal was so complete and calculated that I felt nauseated despite the anti-nausea medication in my IV. So when they said they couldn't afford my surgery, they had access to your inheritance funds the entire time. Your share alone would have covered the surgery 3 times over with money left for your nursing school expenses. William pulled another document from the stack, this one bearing an official court seal. James filed emergency papers at 7 this morning for breach of fiduciary duty and trust fund embezzlement. Your parents are being served with legal notice as we speak, and their access to the trust accounts has been frozen pending investigation. They're going to be arrested. That depends on how cooperative they are about making immediate restitution. Trust fund theft is a felony, but if they return every penny they've stolen plus interest and penalties, the criminal charges might be reduced to civil penalties. I lay back against my pillows, trying to absorb the magnitude of what William was telling me. My parents hadn't just refused to help with my medical emergency, they'd actively stolen money that was specifically designated for exactly this situation. The BMW sitting in their driveway represented my own inheritance being used to reward my sister while I suffered. How did you know about this? William's expression softened. Your grandmother, Dorothy, was very worried about your mother's favoritism toward Madison. She'd watched Janet treat you differently for years and wanted to make sure you'd have protection and support regardless of your parents' preferences. Mom was always closer to Madison. Dorothy saw it too, which is why she structured the trust with very specific language. Both granddaughters were supposed to have equal access to funds for medical emergencies, educational expenses, and major life transitions. She even included provisions requiring written documentation of any withdrawals to prevent exactly what's happened. A nurse appeared to check my vital signs and pain levels, interrupting our conversation briefly. When she left, William continued with details that made my head spin. James spent the night reviewing 5 years of account activity. Your parents have withdrawn over $50,000 from the trust, claiming various family expenses that don't qualify under Dorothy's terms. They've treated your inheritance as their personal emergency fund while telling you they couldn't afford to help with genuine emergencies. What happens now? Now, sweetheart, you receive exactly what your grandmother intended. Full access to your portion of the trust, plus compensation for their misuse of funds. Your medical bills will be paid immediately, and you'll have money for nursing school without working yourself to exhaustion. William smiled for the first time since arriving at the hospital. And your parents are about to learn that stealing from your grandmother's grandchildren carries consequences they never anticipated. By 10 o'clock that morning, the consequences William had promised were already beginning to unfold. My phone had been buzzing constantly with calls from Mom and Dad, but William had convinced me to let them go to voicemail while we handled the legal situation properly. James Hutchinson. William's attorney arrived at the hospital carrying a briefcase that looked like it had seen decades of important legal battles. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and the kind of authoritative presence that suggested he was accustomed to winning complicated cases. Rebecca, I'm sorry we're meeting under these circumstances, James said as he arranged documents on my hospital bed table, but I'm pleased to tell you that the emergency injunction was granted immediately. Your parents' access to the trust funds has been completely frozen and they're required to appear in court Monday morning to explain their misuse of your inheritance. He opened a folder containing what looked like financial statements and legal filings. Here's what we've discovered in our emergency audit of the trust accounts. Over the past 5 years, your parents have made unauthorized withdrawals totaling $53,700. I stared at the numbers, still struggling to comprehend the scope of their theft. That's almost the entire inheritance. Exactly. They've left the trust with just $14,300, barely enough to cover administrative costs. Meanwhile, they've used your grandmother's money for vacations, home renovations, car payments, and finally, Madison's BMW. William leaned forward in his chair. Tell her about the documentation requirements they ignored. James nodded grimly. Your grandmother's trust required written justification for any withdrawal over $500, along with receipts and explanation of how the expense qualified under trust terms. Your parents never filed a single piece of required documentation. They simply treated the account as their personal checking account. Oh, what about Madison? Does she know about the trust? Based on our investigation, Madison was never informed about the inheritance either. She believes her parents purchased the BMW with their own savings and has no idea it represents stolen money from her deceased grandmother's gifts. The legal implications were staggering, but what hurt most was the calculated nature of their deception. This wasn't a moment of weakness or poor judgment. It was 5 years of systematic theft while watching me struggle financially and denying me medical care they could easily afford. How long have you known about this, Grandpa? William sighed heavily. I suspected something was wrong when your parents stopped providing annual trust statements 3 years ago, but Dorothy had trusted them as custodians and I couldn't access account details without legal cause. Your medical emergency gave James the grounds he needed for emergency investigation. And now? James pulled out another set of documents. Now, your parents face felony charges for trust fund embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and elder abuse for misusing your grandmother's estate. The maximum penalty is 10 years in prison and full financial restitution plus punitive damages. 10 years. The prosecution will likely offer plea bargains if they cooperate fully, but they'll need to return every penny they've stolen, pay penalties and interest, and accept permanent removal from any involvement in your financial affairs. My phone buzzed again with another call from Dad. James glanced at the screen and suggested I answer this one, explaining that refusing contact could be interpreted as avoiding resolution. Becca, thank God you answered. Dad's voice was panicked in a way I'd never heard before. We just had police officers at our house serving legal papers. They're saying we stole money from some trust fund. This is all a misunderstanding. Dad, I know about Grandma Dorothy's inheritance. I know you spent my medical emergency money on Madison's car. Silence stretched across the phone line before Dad tried a different approach. Sweetheart, you don't understand how trust funds work. We were managing that money responsibly, investing in family assets that benefit everyone. A BMW benefits everyone. Madison's success reflects well on our entire family. Her career advancement will enable her to support family members who need help in the future. The logic was so twisted, I almost laughed despite everything. So you stole my medical emergency fund to buy Madison a luxury car that might theoretically benefit me someday? We didn't steal anything. We're your parents. That money was for family expenses. James took the phone from me gently. Mr. Chen, this is James Hutchinson, representing Rebecca in this matter. Any further communication should go through my office. Your daughter is recovering from emergency surgery that you refused to authorize despite having access to funds specifically designated for her medical care. I could hear Dad's voice rising on the other end, but James calmly provided his office information and hung up. Rebecca, they're going to try every manipulation tactic they can think of. Don't engage with them directly until this is resolved. What happens with Madison's car? The BMW will likely need to be surrendered to help satisfy the restitution requirements, since it was purchased entirely with misappropriated trust funds. Madison will also need to be informed about the true source of her graduation gift. William reached over to squeeze my hand. I know this is overwhelming, sweetheart, but your grandmother would be proud of you for standing up for yourself. She always said you had more backbone than people gave you credit for. As if summoned by our conversation about her, Madison's contact appeared on my phone screen. James nodded permission for me to answer, curious about how much she knew. "Oh, Becca, what the hell is happening?" Madison's voice was shrill with panic. Mom just called crying about police and lawyers and something about Grandma Dorothy's money. She says they might have to take my car. The conversation that followed would determine whether my sister was truly complicit in our parents' theft or just another victim of their deception and manipulation. "Madison, did you know about Grandma Dorothy's inheritance?" I asked carefully, watching James take notes while listening to our conversation. "What inheritance? What are you talking about?" Madison's voice carried genuine confusion mixed with growing panic. Mom said something about a trust fund, but I thought she was just making excuses about why they can't afford lawyers. Grandma left $68,000 specifically for our medical emergencies and education. Mom and Dad were supposed to tell us about it when we turned 18 and give us access when we needed it. The silence on Madison's end stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you saying my car came from inheritance money, from Grandma Dorothy's inheritance? That was supposed to be for both of us?" "The BMW cost $36,000. You were never supposed to get a graduation gift that expensive because Mom and Dad don't actually have that kind of money. They've been stealing from our inheritance for years." I heard Madison start crying, which surprised me. I'd expected anger or denial, not the heartbroken sobbing that came through the phone. "Becca, I swear I didn't know. They told me they'd been saving for years, that Dad got a big bonus from the dealership, that they wanted to invest in my future." "Madison, I'm not blaming you. I don't think you knew. But I should have questioned it. $36,000 for a graduation gift. That's insane. I was so excited and flattered that they thought I was worth that much investment. I didn't ask logical questions about where the money came from." Through my hospital bed phone, I could hear Madison moving around, probably pacing in her room the way she did when stressed. "Oh my God, Becca, while you were suffering with gallbladder attacks and couldn't afford surgery, I was driving around in a car bought with your medical emergency money. I'm so sorry." This was not the conversation I'd expected to have with my sister. The Madison I'd grown up with was selfish and entitled, but the person crying on the phone sounded genuinely horrified by what she'd unknowingly participated in. "What did Mom and Dad tell you about my surgery situation?" "They said you were being dramatic about pain that wasn't really serious and that you needed to learn financial independence instead of expecting them to solve your problems. Mom said nursing students always exaggerate medical issues because they learn about worst-case scenarios in school." The casual cruelty with which our parents had manipulated Madison against me was almost as disturbing as the financial theft. They'd convinced her that my suffering was character weakness while her luxury was earned success. "Madison, I almost died last night. My gallbladder was infected and beginning to rupture. If Grandpa hadn't intervened, I might not have survived because Mom and Dad were still researching payment options while I needed emergency surgery." "They what?" Madison's voice cracked with emotion. "Becca, I had no idea it was that serious. I thought you were just having minor stomach problems that you could handle with better diet or stress management." "You told me my surgery wasn't really an emergency because I'd survived this long without it." "Because that's what Mom told me. She said doctors always exaggerate to make money and that your problems were mostly stress-related from working too much and not eating properly." I believed her because I didn't have any other information. I realized that Madison had been as manipulated as I had, just in the opposite direction. While our parents convinced me I was undeserving and dramatic, they convinced her that she was exceptional and that my struggles were self-inflicted. "Madison, there's something else you need to know. The car has to be returned. It was bought with stolen money, and the lawyers need it back to help pay restitution. The crying intensified, but it wasn't the entitled tantrum I would have expected from the old Madison. Of course it does. God, Becca, I've been posting photos on social media bragging to everyone about how amazing my parents are. I look like such an idiot. You didn't know. But I should have $36,000 when you needed $12,000 for surgery. How could I not see how wrong that was? William gestured for me to put the call on speaker so he could participate in the conversation. Madison, this is your grandfather, William. Are you at the house right now? Grandpa William. Yes, I'm here. Mom and Dad left an hour ago to meet with some lawyer. They looked terrible, like they'd been crying all night. Madison, I need you to listen carefully. Your parents are facing serious criminal charges for stealing your inheritance money. They're going to try to convince you and Rebecca to forgive them and drop the legal case. But this isn't about family forgiveness anymore. They broke federal laws governing trust funds. Criminal charges like jail. Up to 10 years in prison for felony trust fund embezzlement, plus full financial restitution. The BMW was purchased with money that legally belongs to you and Rebecca, which makes it evidence in a criminal case. James took over the conversation, explaining to Madison what would happen next. The car would be repossessed within 24 hours as part of the asset recovery process. She would need to remove all personal belongings and turn over the keys and documentation to avoid being charged as an accessory. Madison, I said gently, I know this is horrible, but you're not responsible for what they did. You were lied to, just like I was. Becca, I said awful things to you. I told you that your surgery wasn't important, that you needed to be more grateful, that maybe if you'd chosen a better career path, our parents would invest in you too. I was so cruel. You were repeating what they told you to think. But I should have been a better sister. I should have visited you in the hospital or offered to help with medical bills from my job earnings. Instead, I was posting BMW selfies while you were in pain. The conversation continued for another 20 minutes, as Madison processed the full scope of our parents' deception and theft. By the end, she was offering to testify against them if necessary and asking what she could do to help with my recovery. After we hung up, William looked at me with something approaching surprise. That went better than I expected. Madison isn't evil. She was just raised to think she deserved more than everyone else, including me. But when faced with the truth, she chose the right side. James gathered his documents, preparing to leave for court filings. Rebecca, your recovery just became much stronger. Having Madison as an ally instead of an opponent will make the restitution process much smoother. As they prepared to leave, I realized that my family was being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously. The parents who had raised me were revealed as thieves and manipulators, but the sister I'd written off was proving to have more character than I'd ever given her credit for. 3 days later, as I recovered at home with William staying in my guest room to help with post-surgical care, the consequences for Madison became publicly humiliating in ways that broke my heart despite everything that had happened. I was napping on my couch when William woke me with a gentle shake. Rebecca, you need to see this. Madison just called and she's very upset. He handed me my phone, which showed 17 missed calls and a string of increasingly frantic text messages from my sister. The most recent one simply said, "They came for the car in front of everyone. I'm so embarrassed I want to die." I called her back immediately, and she answered on the first ring with a voice thick from crying. "Becca, it was horrible. I was having a pool party for my sorority sisters and some marketing classmates, maybe 20 people, and this huge truck just pulled into the driveway. The repo company came for the BMW. 2 men with clipboards and a tow truck. They said they had court orders to repossess the vehicle as stolen property in a criminal case. Everyone at the party heard them. Becca. They all stood on the deck watching while I had to get my things out of the car and hand over the keys. I could picture the scene, Madison's carefully curated social image crumbling in front of the people she'd been trying to impress with her family's apparent wealth and success. The BMW that had represented her elevated status was being towed away as evidence in a criminal investigation. "What did your friends say?" "What could they say?" Sarah asked if our family was in some kind of legal trouble. Jessica wanted to know if the car was stolen when they gave it to me. Everyone was taking pictures and videos, probably posting them to social media already. Madison's voice broke again as she described having to explain to her sorority sisters that her graduation gift was purchased with inheritance money her parents had stolen from her and her sister. The revelation that her family's generosity was actually criminal theft had transformed her from envied to pitied in a single afternoon. "Madison, I'm sorry this happened publicly." "Don't apologize. This is consequences for what Mom and Dad did and what I participated in without knowing better. I just never imagined how humiliating it would feel to have your lies exposed in front of everyone you're trying to impress." She described the awkward conversations that followed, with friends asking careful questions about whether she'd known about the theft, whether I was okay after my surgery, and whether she needed help dealing with the family crisis. Some offered genuine support, but others seemed more interested in gossip than friendship. "The worst part is realizing how shallow some of these relationships are," Madison continued. "When I had a BMW and was posting about family vacations and expensive gifts, these same people were so impressed with my lifestyle. Now that they know it was all built on lies and theft, some of them can barely look at me." "Those aren't real friends anyway." "I know, but it still hurts. I built my social identity around being the girl whose family could afford luxury gifts and exclusive experiences. Now, I'm the girl whose parents are criminals who stole from their sick daughter." William suggested that Madison come stay with us for a few days while the immediate drama settled down and our parents dealt with their legal situation. She arrived that evening with 2 suitcases and red-rimmed eyes, looking younger and more vulnerable than I'd seen her since childhood. "Becca, I keep thinking about all the times I could have helped you," she said as we sat on my couch watching a mindless comedy movie. "I made decent money at Stephanie's boutique, probably enough to contribute something toward your medical bills. But I spent it all on clothes and entertainment because I thought you were just being dramatic about your pain." "Madison, you were 22 years old and believing what our parents told you. I don't blame you for that. But I should have seen through their manipulation. I'm supposed to be studying marketing, which is literally about recognizing persuasion techniques and emotional manipulation. How did I not notice that they were pitting us against each other?" We spent that evening talking through years of family dynamics that suddenly made sense in this new context. Madison recalled conversations where Mom had praised her academic achievements while criticizing my choices, or where Dad had discussed my supposed character flaws while highlighting her responsible behavior. "They trained me to think I was special and you were difficult," Madison realized. "Every time you succeeded at something, they found ways to diminish it or explain why it didn't really count. When I succeeded, they made it seem like proof of superior character and intelligence. And they trained me to think I had to work twice as hard to deserve half as much recognition. God, Becca, we never had a fair chance at a normal sister relationship. They were sabotaging us from both sides." As Madison processed the full scope of our parents' emotional and financial manipulation, I watched her transform from the entitled girl I'd grown up resenting into someone I genuinely enjoyed spending time with. The crisis had forced her to confront uncomfortable truths about privilege and fairness that she might never have faced otherwise. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we figure out how to be sisters without our parents controlling the relationship," I replied, "and we testify against them in court if necessary to make sure they can't do this to anyone else." Madison nodded with determination that surprised me. "I want to help however I can. They need to face consequences for what they did to you and to Grandma Dorothy's memory." The following Monday morning, William Madison and I sat in James Hutchinson's law office, listening to him explain the plea negotiations that had taken place over the weekend. Our parents had hired their own attorney, but the evidence against them was overwhelming, and their legal position was essentially hopeless. Your parents are facing a choice, James explained, arranging documents on his conference table. They can accept full criminal responsibility and cooperate completely with asset recovery, or they can fight the charges and face maximum penalties, including lengthy prison sentences. Madison had insisted on being present for these discussions, claiming she needed to understand the full legal situation to make informed decisions about her own involvement. I was impressed by her maturity in handling what had to be terrifying information about our parents' potential imprisonment. "What does cooperation mean exactly?" I asked. "Complete financial disclosure, surrender of all assets purchased with trust funds, testimony about how they justified the expenditures to themselves, and agreement to supervised restitution payments for the next 10 years. William leaned forward in his chair. "And if they refuse?" Federal prosecution for elder abuse, trust fund embezzlement, mail fraud for forging required documentation, and conspiracy. We're talking about 15 to 20 years in federal prison, plus seizure of their house cars, retirement accounts, everything." The scope of consequences was staggering. Mom and Dad's decision to steal from their daughter's inheritance could cost them not just their freedom, but their entire life savings and future financial security. "James, there's something else," Madison said quietly. "I think my parents have been lying about other financial things too. Dad's been talking about dealership problems and commission cuts, but he just bought a new fishing boat last month that he said was a business investment." This was news to me. Dad bought a boat. A base boat with all the fancy electronics, maybe $15,000. He said he was going to take potential customers fishing to build relationships, but I've never seen him use it for business. James made notes while Madison described other recent purchases. She'd observed new furniture for the living room, a vacation to Branson, Missouri, expensive dinners at steakhouses that Dad claimed as business expenses. The pattern suggested our parents had been using trust fund money for lifestyle inflation far beyond Madison's BMW. "If there's a boat, we need to find it immediately," James said grimly. "Any asset purchased with trust funds needs to be recovered as part of the restitution." By Wednesday afternoon, James's investigators had uncovered the full scope of our parents' financial deception. The boat was registered in Dad's name and stored at a marina on Lake Louisville. Mom had used trust funds to pay for a kitchen renovation the previous year, claiming it was a family investment that would benefit everyone. Even more disturbing, they'd been using the trust money to make payments on credit cards they'd maxed out, buying luxury items and taking vacations. The inheritance Dorothy had intended to protect her granddaughters had become a slush fund for maintaining a lifestyle our parents couldn't actually afford. "The total misappropriation is now at $61,000, James reported during our Thursday meeting. "They've essentially spent your entire inheritance plus interest, leaving the trust account nearly empty." Madison was furious in a way I'd never seen before. "They've been living like rich people on money that belonged to their sick daughter and her college expenses. How do you rationalize that to yourself?" "Apparently, they convinced themselves they were borrowing money they intended to pay back someday," James explained. "Your father's commission income has been declining for 3 years, but instead of adjusting their lifestyle, they use your inheritance to maintain appearances." The psychological manipulation was as extensive as the financial theft. Our parents had created elaborate justifications for treating Madison as deserving luxury while convincing me I was undeserving of basic medical care, all while secretly funding both our expenses with money that legally belonged to us. "What's their attorney saying about a plea agreement?" William asked. "They want to characterize this as a family misunderstanding rather than criminal theft, and they're proposing to pay back the money over time without admitting wrongdoing." Absolutely not," Madison said immediately. "They need to admit what they did and face real consequences. Otherwise, they'll just find other ways to manipulate and steal from family members." I was surprised by Madison's vehemence, but proud of her moral clarity in a situation that could have been handled much more selfishly. She was voluntarily giving up any chance of maintaining her parents' financial support in favor of holding them accountable for their crimes. Madison's right, I agreed. They made calculated decisions to steal from us while lying to our faces. If we let them minimize this as a misunderstanding, they'll never learn and they'll never change. James smiled approvingly. That's exactly what I was hoping you'd both say. Your united front makes the prosecution's case much stronger and sends a clear message about accountability. The meeting ended with James filing court papers, rejecting our parents' plea proposal, and demanding full criminal prosecution unless they accepted complete responsibility and immediate asset forfeiture. Mom and Dad had until Friday afternoon to decide whether they wanted to cooperate fully or face maximum federal penalties. Girls, your grandmother would be very proud of both of you, William said as we left the law office. You're showing exactly the kind of strength and integrity she tried to teach your mother, but Janet never learned. For the first time in my adult life, I felt like Madison and I were truly on the same team, fighting for justice rather than competing for parental approval that had never been fairly distributed anyway. Friday afternoon brought the phone call that would determine our parents' fate and our family's future. James contacted us at 3:30 to report that Mom and Dad had accepted full criminal responsibility and agreed to complete asset forfeiture rather than face trial and potential decades in federal prison. They're pleading guilty to all charges, James explained during our conference call with William Madison and me listening together in my living room. Felony trust fund embezzlement, breach of fiduciary duty, and elder abuse for misusing Dorothy's estate funds. The plea agreement was comprehensive and humbling for our parents. They would surrender their house, both cars, the boat, all jewelry and luxury items purchased with trust funds, plus their retirement accounts to satisfy restitution requirements. Dad would lose his job at the dealership due to the felony conviction, and Mom's real estate license was permanently revoked. What about jail time? Madison asked. 18 months in minimum security federal prison, followed by 5 years of supervised probation with mandatory financial counseling and regular check-ins with parole officers. I felt conflicted about my parents facing imprisonment, even though their actions had been deliberately harmful to me. Madison seemed to have no such ambivalence about consequences they'd brought entirely upon themselves. Good, she said firmly. Maybe 18 months will give them time to think about what family loyalty actually means. The financial restitution would be substantial. Between asset sales and structured payments, Madison and I would each receive our full inheritance portions, plus interest and penalties, totaling approximately $40,000 each. My medical bills were paid immediately, and I'd have money for nursing school without working multiple jobs. But William had additional news that transformed this financial victory into something much more meaningful. Girls, I've been working with James on something your grandmother would have wanted. We're establishing new educational funds for both of you with legal protections that prevent any family interference. What kind of educational funds? I asked. Osvantos, full tuition coverage for your nursing degree completion, plus funding for any advanced certifications or graduate school you want to pursue. Madison, you'll have full funding for your UT Austin marketing program, plus internship support and networking opportunities. Madison started crying again, but this time from gratitude rather than shame. Grandpa, that's too much. You don't need to do that for us. It's not charity, sweetheart. Your grandmother left specific instructions in her will about supporting your educations if your parents ever failed in their responsibilities. This situation triggered those contingency provisions. William had spent the week working with financial planners to structure educational trusts that would give both Madison and me opportunities to succeed without depending on our parents' approval or support. The funding was designed to encourage academic achievement and career development while providing safety nets for future emergencies. There's one more thing. William continued with a smile in his voice. Dorothy's will included a provision for family reunification if her grandchildren ever needed to be protected from their parents. Both of you are welcome to consider me your primary family support system for as long as you need. This offer meant more to me than the money or educational funding. For the first time in my adult life, I had a family member who prioritized my well-being over maintaining artificial peace or enabling destructive behavior. "Grandpa, I'd like that very much," I said. Me too," Madison agreed. "I want to learn how to be part of a family that actually cares about each other instead of competing for scraps of attention and approval." The transformation in our relationship had been remarkable to witness. Madison was no longer the entitled girl who dismissed my pain as dramatic exaggeration. She'd become someone who stood up for justice and took responsibility for her past behavior while working to build a better future. "I have an idea," Madison said suddenly. "Becca, would you be interested in starting some kind of advocacy project together? Maybe helping other young adults recognize financial abuse or medical neglect in families?" The suggestion intrigued me. "What are you thinking?" "You understand the medical side and the nursing perspective. I understand marketing and social media. We could create resources for people who don't realize their families are manipulating or stealing from them." William was enthusiastic about the idea, suggesting it could be partly funded through the educational trusts as a form of community service learning. Madison's marketing skills, combined with my healthcare knowledge, could genuinely help other families avoid the financial and emotional abuse we'd experienced. It would be a way to honor Grandma Dorothy's memory while preventing other people from suffering like we did, Madison explained. As we discussed possibilities for advocacy work and educational partnership, I realized that our parents' betrayal had inadvertently created something more valuable than money, a genuine sister relationship based on mutual respect and shared values, rather than competition and manipulation. William had given us the tools to build independent, successful lives, but Madison and I were choosing to build them together as true family. 6 months later, Madison and I sat in a coffee shop near the University of Texas at Dallas campus, editing content for our family advocacy blog that had grown far beyond either of our initial expectations. What started as a simple website sharing our story had attracted thousands of readers and dozens of families seeking help with similar financial and emotional abuse situations. "Listen to this message," Madison said, reading from her laptop screen. "A 25-year-old nursing student in Phoenix whose parents refused to help with her car repair bills while buying her brother a motorcycle. She found our blog and realized her family's trust fund was being misused the same way ours was. Our advocacy project had connected us with family financial abuse cases across the country, many involving parents who favored one child while manipulating or stealing from another. The pattern was disturbingly common: parents who claimed financial limitations to avoid helping one child while secretly funding luxury items for their preferred child. "Have you heard anything from Mom and Dad recently?" I asked. Madison shook her head. "Nothing since they went to prison 3 months ago. I think they're still hoping we'll forgive them and drop the restitution requirements when they get out." Our parents had been transferred to a minimum security facility in East Texas, where they were completing financial counseling programs and working prison jobs that paid barely enough to cover their basic expenses. The contrast with their previous lifestyle of luxury vacations and expensive gifts was stark and intentional. "I'm not dropping anything," I said firmly. "They need to pay back every penny they stole plus interest, or they haven't learned anything about consequences." Madison nodded in agreement. "They still haven't sent you a real apology letter, just that manipulative card Dad sent claiming they were sorry for the misunderstanding and hoping we could move past this family disagreement." The inability to accept responsibility or acknowledge the harm they'd caused convinced both of us that our parents hadn't experienced genuine remorse. They were serving time and paying restitution because they'd been caught and prosecuted, not because they understood why their actions were morally wrong. How's your marketing program going? I asked, changing to a more positive subject. Oh, really well. Professor Martinez connected me with an internship at a nonprofit that helps seniors avoid financial scams. It's perfect experience for the advocacy work we're doing, plus it looks great on my resume. Madison had thrived at UT Austin once she was freed from the pressure of maintaining an artificially expensive lifestyle. Her marketing projects focused on ethical business practices and social responsibility subjects she'd never shown interest in before confronting our parents' manipulation. And your nursing classes? I love it. Clinical rotations start next semester, and Dr. Williams thinks I'm a strong candidate for the accelerated RN program. I might finish 6 months earlier than originally planned. My recovery from gallbladder surgery had been complete, and the financial stress relief of having educational funding had improved my academic performance significantly. Without working 50-hour weeks to pay tuition, I could focus entirely on learning and preparation for my nursing career. Grandpa's coming to dinner Sunday, right? Madison asked. Yes, and he's bringing his attorney friend James. They want to discuss expanding our advocacy work into a formal nonprofit organization. William had become the family patriarch we'd never had, providing guidance and support without manipulation or favoritism. His weekly dinners at my apartment had become treasured traditions where Madison and I could discuss our goals and challenges with someone who genuinely wanted us to succeed. I think we should do it, Madison said enthusiastically. James thinks we could qualify for grant funding to help other families navigate financial abuse cases. We could actually make this a career. The possibility of turning our painful experience into meaningful work that helped other people appealed to both of us. Madison's marketing expertise combined with my healthcare knowledge created a unique perspective on family financial abuse that could genuinely improve lives. There's something else, Madison said, her tone becoming more serious. I've been thinking about what kind of relationship we want with Mom and Dad when they get out of prison. What do you mean? Do we want a relationship at all? They're going to expect us to pretend this never happened and go back to family dinners and holiday celebrations like nothing changed. I'd been avoiding this question, but Madison was right that we needed to make conscious decisions about our future family structure. Our parents would complete their prison sentences expecting forgiveness and reconciliation, but neither of us felt obligated to provide either. I think any relationship would need to be completely different from before, I said carefully. No financial discussions, no family gatherings where they try to manipulate us against each other, no pretending they didn't commit crimes against us. Honestly, I'm not sure I want any relationship, Madison admitted. I keep thinking about how they convinced me you were dramatic and selfish while they were stealing your medical emergency money. How do you forgive that level of calculated cruelty? Maybe we don't have to decide right now. We can figure it out when the time comes. Madison smiled, the first genuinely happy expression I'd seen from her all day. I'm grateful this happened in a weird way. I know that sounds terrible, but if they hadn't been caught stealing from us, I might have spent my whole life thinking I was better than other people because my parents spoiled me. And I might have spent my whole life thinking I didn't deserve basic medical care or family support. Now we know better, and we're helping other people learn the same lessons without having to go through the trauma we experienced. As we packed up our laptops and prepared to leave the coffee shop, I reflected on how completely our lives had changed since that devastating Instagram discovery 6 months ago. Madison and I had transformed from rivals competing for parental approval into partners working towards shared goals of justice and helping others. Our parents' betrayal had inadvertently given us the gift of genuine family relationships based on mutual respect and shared values, rather than manipulation and favoritism. 1 year after my emergency gallbladder surgery, I stood in the graduation ceremony auditorium, wearing my nursing school cap and gown, looking out at an audience that included everyone who truly mattered in my life. William sat in the front row, beaming with pride, while Madison held up her phone recording every moment of my achievement. The journey to this day had been remarkable in ways I never could have anticipated. Not only had I completed my RN degree 6 months ahead of schedule, but Madison and I had successfully launched our nonprofit organization helping families recognize and address financial abuse. Our advocacy work had assisted over 200 families in the past year, with legal recoveries totaling more than $3 million. Rebecca Chen, the dean, announced, and I walked across the stage to receive my nursing degree with confidence and financial security I'd never imagined possible. The scholarship funding from Grandma Dorothy's Trust had allowed me to focus entirely on academics and clinical training, resulting in graduating summa cum laude with job offers from 3 different hospitals. After the ceremony, as we celebrated at William's favorite restaurant, Madison surprised me with an announcement that brought tears to my eyes. "Becca, I've decided to add a double major in nonprofit management. I want to make our advocacy work my full-time career after graduation." Madison, that's wonderful. Are you sure? Absolutely. This past year has shown me that helping people matters more than making money in corporate marketing. Plus, we work really well together, and I think we could build something important. William raised his glass of wine in a toast to both of my granddaughters who turned their grandmother's worst fears about family betrayal into their greatest strengths for helping others. The conversation naturally turned to our parents who were scheduled for release from federal prison in 6 months. We'd received several letters from them over the past year, most continuing to minimize their crimes as misunderstandings and requesting visits that we declined to accept. "Have you decided what kind of contact you want with them?" William asked gently. Madison and I exchanged glances before I answered. "We've talked about it extensively, and we're both comfortable with supervised visits, only probably at your house, Grandpa. No private conversations, no financial discussions, and absolutely no attempts to guilt us into forgiveness." "We want to see if they've genuinely changed," Madison added, "but we're not interested in pretending their crimes didn't happen or going back to the family dynamics that enabled their behavior." William nodded approvingly. "That sounds like a healthy boundary. Your grandmother would be proud of how you've both handled this situation with strength and integrity." The financial restitution had been completed ahead of schedule through asset sales and structured payments. Madison and I each received our full inheritance portions plus penalties, and our educational trusts were fully funded for graduate school and professional development. More importantly, we'd learned to value ourselves and each other independent of parental approval or support. "There's something else," I said, pulling out an acceptance letter I'd been saving to share. I was accepted to the nurse practitioner program at UT Southwestern. I can complete my master's degree while working part-time and continuing our advocacy work. Madison practically squealed with excitement. "Becca, that's incredible! You'll be able to provide primary care to families dealing with medical financial stress. It's perfect." The conversation continued as we discussed future plans for expanding our nonprofit Madison's academic progress, and William's ongoing legal work helping other families navigate trust fund abuse cases. Our lives had been transformed from competition and scarcity to collaboration and abundance. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave the restaurant, I reflected on the profound life lesson that had emerged from my parents' betrayal. I'd learned that fighting for yourself isn't selfish when others refuse to treat you fairly. Sometimes the people who should protect you are the ones you need protection from, and that's okay. Real strength comes from recognizing your worth regardless of others' opinions, and sometimes justice requires courage to demand what you deserve. Family isn't about blood relations who hurt you, but about people who stand up for you when it matters most. Madison and William had proven themselves to be my real family through their actions and choices, not their genetic connections or legal obligations. Most importantly, I'd learned that surviving injustice isn't enough. Transforming it into advocacy for others creates meaning from suffering and prevents future victims from experiencing the same harm. Before we leave, Madison said, "I want to ask our readers a question for our blog." She pulled out her phone to record a brief video message. Have you ever experienced financial favoritism in your family? Have your parents claimed they couldn't afford to help you while secretly funding luxury items for your siblings? Share your stories in the comments below because recognizing these patterns is the first step toward protecting yourself and demanding fair treatment. And remember, I added to the video, your health and well-being matter just as much as anyone else's success and happiness. Don't let family members convince you otherwise. Like this video, if it resonated with your experience, subscribe for more advocacy content and share this message with anyone who might need to hear it. Madison ended the recording with her signature closing, "Thank you for following our journey from family betrayal to sister partnership. Remember that justice is possible when you have the courage to demand it, and family bonds built on truth and respect are stronger than those built on lies and manipulation." We'll see you next week with another story of families fighting back against financial abuse. As we walked to our cars in the restaurant parking lot, I realized that my parents' theft and betrayal had inadvertently given me everything I'd ever really wanted: genuine family relationships, financial security, meaningful work, and the knowledge that I was strong enough to protect myself and help others do the same. Sometimes the worst things that happen to you lead to the best things that happen to you if you have the courage to transform pain into purpose and injustice into advocacy for change.